Now, before we actually move on to authentication, there's one more thing we can do on the front end, and that is pagination, so splitting our list of posts across multiple pages. And I want to do that first. Now, for that, we need multiple posts. So let's quickly create a couple of posts, like a cup of coffee. Choose that cup image, which fits it quite well. So tasty, whatever you want, and click accept. And let's add another post, a real duck, because I replaced that image of the other duck, so maybe it's time to add another one. This is a duck. Click accept. And now you see, here I only see 2 posts on the front end. I don't see any more posts than that. If I reload, I see 3, however, but I actually want to limit that. I want to limit the amount of posts I see there and instead pass some information to the front end that allows the front end to show some next and previous buttons at the bottom. Now, all the logic for this was already added to the front end, but on the back end, I need to return different data. I need to paginate my data. For that, we should dive into our controller and there into the getPosts method or action, because that is where I fetch all posts, of course. And that is where I want to implement pagination. Now, it turns out that in my front end, feed.js, where I load my posts, so in the load posts method there, I actually do set some pages. I have my own pagination logic in there, and I can pass that page data back onto my backend. I want to do that through query parameters, and I want to do that in load posts in the front-end code. Here, in my URL, I'll add $page equals to add a page query parameter, and I'll add this page variable, which I'm creating up here. And this will be managed internally in my front-end app, so this will be either 1 or 2 or whichever page I'll try to load there. So now I pass that page query parameter to my backend. And there, I now need to extract it to implement pagination. So in my getPosts action here, I can extract the current page by accessing request, and then query parameters are stored in the query object, and then page. I'll set this to 1 as a default. You saw this syntax a couple of times. This OR syntax checks whether this is undefined, in which case it would assign this value, so that they always start on page 1. Then I'll set the per page value to 2, and I do this because I have the same value in the front end. Now, of course, you could find a more elaborate solution where you pass that per page data from the backend to the front end so that the front end can adjust dynamically, but here I want to show the general setup and how this works. So I am hard-coded per page here, and I have hard-coded it in the front end. Now I'll create a new variable, total items, which I'll need to determine how many items I have in the database. Because now I'll add a new find request, and I will add count documents here to find out how many documents I actually have. This will not retrieve the documents, it will just count them. Then I can have success or fail. If I fail, I'll have the same logic as before, so I'll check the status code, add it if it does not exist, and forward the error. If I succeed, then in this then block, in this function there, I'll know how many items I have, and I'll store that value in my total items variable. I created that variable so that I can now also use that data in other functions than this function. Because in here, in this then block, I now want to return my old fetching logic so that I first of all count, and once I got the count, I actually find the documents and retrieve them. So here I will return this and all that logic. So this then block, essentially, I'll cut that out. I'll remove the catch block. I'll add the then block after the first then block. And this catch block will now take care about both counting and then this internal finding. However, here I will not just find, of course. I want to add pagination, and the logic is the same as before. We can skip a certain amount of items with the skip method. And there I calculate the current page minus 1 times per page. So that if I am on page 1, this will result in 0 and I skip no items. If I'm on page 2, this will result in 1 and I skip all the items that were on page 1. I also want to limit the amount of items I retrieve with the limit method. And here I take per page, so the amount of items I want to have on each page. This is what I now return in there. And then the posts here are these, well, limited amounts of posts. In my response, I now don't just need to return the post, though. In my frontend, I also have some logic to take the total amount of posts into account, so that in my React frontend, I know when to show the next and previous buttons. For that, I'll add another argument to the data that I return in the response. I'll add total items in there. I'll be looking for this total items property in my frontend code, so you should get this right, not misspell it. And the value will be my total items variable. So this variable value, which I assign here, will be stored down there. With that, if I save that backend, if I reload the front end, you now see a next button here. If you click it, we load the next page where we only have one item, and I can go back. So now I have pagination added as well. As you saw, in the same way as before, because REST APIs are not that different in the end, just handled differently because we have a separate front end.